For what we want to talk about here as a panel. My name is Matt Brannon. I am with Wachsman, which is a PR agency specializing in blockchain, Web3, crypto. And in that position, it gives me an opportunity to work with a lot of companies that are doing exciting things in this space, RWAs being a major part of what they offer, and kind of seeing that explosion of interest in the space over the past 2-3 years. And the trajectory that it's on has been exciting. But as kind of a conduit between the companies that are developing this technology and groups like, primarily for me, the media, but also legislators, investors, potential partners, probably the most common question, or one of the first things that comes up for me, is like, this is really cool, this is fantastic, but how do I know that it's real? Like, how do I know that this is legit? How do I know that this thing that you're saying is on chain exists in reality? And that's a fair question. I think it's the kind of question that anybody would ask if they're going to be investing into something. And unfortunately, it's something that I often don't have a great answer for. And something like that, that could threaten to derail this, this whole idea and movement here of RWAs. Thankfully, there's a lot of really, really smart people that are working on this problem. And we've got 3 people on stage here that are some of the most qualified people in the world to talk about this today. So I think maybe to start off with, guys, just a quick lightning round type brief answer. But for all of you, what do you see as being the biggest misconception that you see in the RWA space in regards to verification? What are people getting wrong? What are they not understanding? Yeah, JC, we'll just work our way down.
I think verification is often equated with zero-knowledge proofs. And I think when you come into this world of RWA, you gotta ask yourself whether, so zero-knowledge proofs, look, I'm as excited about ZK Spring as anybody, but do you need proofs that you're going to make to low-level smart contracts, or are you trying to attach these to something in the real world? And I think this is an important question to think about, because proofs come in different shapes and sizes.
It's not all ZK. There's other options out there. Massimo?
Well, looking at the question more from a business point of view, or from the point of view of a person who spent 20 years in finance, often one misconception is that, verification by itself is enough, for example, to make a product more interesting when you look at the supply chain. That doesn't happen. Several companies brought you proofs of things that were completely irrelevant to the client. Well, for example, what I've seen working with DAC is that when you complete the entire supply chain, you actually, particularly for products like fashion or food, where really verification of all the steps is important, you increase value. And if you look at the reality of RWA, and particularly products that then you want to have a market for them, one of the big misconceptions is that once you have provided a verification that allows you to say, okay, that tokens represent that asset, even if that's convincing, that's supposed to be enough to get liquidity. That's not the case. That's not the case. It's a legend. People from banks actually think that people tokenize to get more clients. That's not the case. I mean, the reality of markets in blockchain do have things that are more interesting than their products, under many points of view. I mean, in DeFi, for example, we can make borrowing lending with people that we don't know, because somehow the technology allows you to move the collateral in ways that in finance do not exist. So you don't only have to provide a verification. That also needs to be useful. For example, there are cool things nowadays that are happening about proof of reserve, proof of collateral, that may allow to bring real product to blockchain.
That's great. Davide?
Yeah, my personal view is that I've been working for years in real world RWA, but I love to call also real world transaction, because my company deal with more than 300 companies writing a bunch of data every day about their products, about their assets, and anything. And what I come up with is that the question that come up very often is that, but there are real data just because are written in the chain in a smart contract storage, and this is always the same question. So I'm very glad to be an early adopter of Truebit technology since the beginning, because I feel like we are entering a new era in which this question can have an answer. So I see in Truebit Verify the tool that can allow us to provide proof of what we are saying, proof of the value that are already providing to our customers. So we basically provide the transparency, we provide accountability, and so on. And this new product, Truebit Verify, I think that will change the game.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about why verification. You know, this seems intuitive, but I think it needs to be discussed. Why verification is so important for RWAs, and then also, and Massimo, I'll direct this to you first, and then we can pass it to the other guys. But so, you know, how does that verification factor into things like asset valuation? You know, what is it in the big picture? I'll pass to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of what Jason mentioned about the crisis. The crisis was mostly about big financial crisis. Was mostly about products that lost value because of lack of verification of what was behind them. And at some point, we even found out that a big part of this loss of value was actually panic. But how can a market, trust the product when you really don't trust what is basically, the underlying of any financial assets? So that's fundamental. And the example I was making about collateral, I was, for example, seeing nowadays that Eurex has started to use, probably for the first time, because I'm always very dubious, when I see big institutions in financial markets say that they are using distributed ledger. So often that's more for marketing. But in this case, it's real application, because they mostly centralized collateral, and they still have a few independent collateral providers. And in that case, they do have an issue of trust. And they are using distributed ledger because that makes better, easier for them to check that. So the big solution that they have found in finance has always been centralized. So there is a very big owner of trust from everyone that tells you, yes, this exists really, this has got value. If this doesn't exist, I will cover you, I will bail out the product. But if you want to go out, and not go through just big giants, and you want to use the decentralized market to actually find a market for your products, it's fundamental that you find a solution for that.
Yeah, and
show what is the value behind.
I mean, it's if there's no trust, what are we doing here?
But we need tools, and we need standards, and that's what Truebit is doing, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, Davide, anything to tack on to that?
Yes, the financial crisis is a good example I can tackle.
Since it was a good jumping off point.
Yeah, well, it's been a few years since it came up, but I think that what we said before, that there's what you used to be able to. One of the things that happened during the financial crisis is that investors were using the same toolbox that they had been using. They were eyeballing stuff. We need now a new toolbox, new machine. Like, I mean, remember when the Polaroid picture was approved, right? I mean, times have changed, right? I mean, it's easy to make a picture of just about anything now. And I think that if you think about, for example, what the actual, let's get down to the actual details of what happened. You had these mortgages that were wrapped into, I guess, mortgage-backed securities, which were then put into these CDOs, for collateralized debt obligations. So you had and then those were wrapped into another level of collateralized debt obligations, and then investors are buying those. So by the time it gets there, you have no idea what's really in the box, right? And just try to imagine a different system where you actually could see into the box. What is it that you would need to have the visibility into that system? And I think just as sort of a jumping off point, you feel free to jump in, Davide, but I think if you think, okay, the mortgage itself, you have a document that seems like a pretty clear, undisputed place to start. That's not so complicated. But what you want to be able to do is have, there are so many levels here, you need to be able to automate it. You're not going to read them all by hand. So you need these tools that can help you say, okay, this one is wrapped into the collection of securities, and which machine did it, when was it done, what time did it happen, go ahead.
To say the truth, if one could have gone into the products of that time, would have found that some were probably not so bad. No defaults happened in the long run, and no money would have been lost. But a lot of bad things got in, but even just few. When you have the proof that there may be some shit in your portfolio, and you cannot distinguish which one is a good one from a bad one, then there is a collapse of confidence everywhere. And that makes me think of one slide that I had to turn a lot to see. Is the one, don't remember the name, but you were talking about putting together a measurement and using that to create an asset class, a measurement and a token. Somehow this is true in the sense that, for example, during the crisis, there was some good ideas, because obviously even today we think that pooling credit is a good idea. That was the beginning of the financial crisis. Then that was stretched too far, because you started to give trust to something called credit agencies. When they turned out not to be really trustable, everything collapsed. That was the word of centralized trust. But if nowadays something similar happens, if, for example, you are able to measure that something is reliable, something really exists, you can tokenize it, and that's a new asset class. And if you are really able to see what is behind, you don't lose trust. You make something that is much more solid than what we used to see in the centralized world.
Yeah, for sure. Davide, let me toss one to you real quick, because I think you have kind of a unique perspective on this with the work that you do with Quadrans and partnering with the EU on supply chain type stuff. So you've got these kind of two areas of innovation, legislation, regulatory compliance, and verification is a pretty necessary step to kind of bridge those. Kind of how do you see that as being taking this to the next level, for somewhere that institutions be comfortable, being involved more than they are today?
Yeah, sure. I've been working with the EU regulatory framework for a couple of years, and I can. At the beginning, I see the regulatory framework, for example, in textile supply chain as a big issue for us. But then we understand that first of all, blockchain and RWA could be a powerful tool to overcome these difficulties, and then after a long journey, we end up also that verification is a mandatory tool, in my opinion. I can make a couple of examples. For example, we use verification to provide authenticity of data. We use verification to breach data, so basically data portability, and in some cases also interoperability between very heterogeneous data sets and frameworks and software. And at the end of the story, we also use verification to verify the actual data that were provided to stakeholders, to the final consumer, and to the EU itself. So custom body, for example, that needed to manage all the information that are required, for example, in a regulatory framework like digital product passport or certificate of origin and so on. So I think that RWA could be a powerful tool to bridge between the regulatory framework and to take advantage of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Jason, I know we wanted to kind of stay out of the weeds on the technical stuff, but if we could just kind of maybe flirt with the weeds vaguely. Some of the things, what do you see as being the big challenges, on the technical front here? And I think especially with what you do with Truebit, things like provenance or proof of identity, things along those lines. Like, what do you see as being kind of the things that need to be overcome? How far are we from that? Are we on the right track?
Sure. Let's flirt with the weeds. I think that without going over and saying things that have already been set up until now, I do think, well, let's use Truebit as an example, I guess.
Absolutely.
So we'll go a little bit. I know I've been alluding to other proofs. So, there are trusted execution environments is another form of proof. We at Truebit follow a different path, which we actually introduced to blockchain long before it was used for L2s and optimistic rollups in particular, which is the verification game. So this is a mechanism that it is a proof mechanism. You probably heard the word fraud proof floating around. So it's basically, if you have they call it optimistic because it's true until somebody disputes it. If they dispute it, then you have, like, if it's a computation, then you're going to do bisection, right? And you chop up the computation into, like, machine state sizes and find the first machine state in the execution trace. In other words, the computation steps where the parties disagree, and then that in the blockchain world, you run that one step on chain. But by analogy, I think that this verification game, originally, if you think about what it was there for, was to expand the power of smart contracts. So assumption that we've always had, and I don't think anyone's going to dispute this, that smart contracts always compute correctly. They're just really limited, and they're not really that well connected to the outside world. So yeah, no one's saying, man, my smart contract, it just didn't compute correct. It's not what you hear. So the verification game takes that small kernel of truth and it essentially proofs it out so that you can do much larger computations. So what we're doing here is trying to find, I guess, these little pieces of truth here, where I said in the example I had before, where you had like a mortgage, that's like your starting point, and then you weave this technology around it so that you actually could do CDP, collateralized debt, CDO, I guess. CDP or CDO, I don't know. I think I've seen both, but they then you enable that. I mean, this is like kind of a really boring example, but I think that what this technology opens up, possibilities in many other areas, including environmental and biotech, certainly supply chain, where Davide mentions, but so it's not finance, like traditional finance is really just the starting point where we can explain these examples, and
it's an exciting starting point.
Yeah. This is really exciting because this is the most inspiring thing in the verification game. So you can expand the capabilities of the smart contracts outside the chain, but still having a proof of the execution on chain. So this is the most exciting concept for me.
Yeah, because if we think of DeFi, it's still limited to relatively simple products, but if you have, for example, any products that requires running some heavy computations, think today, we mentioned, for example, environmental or climate derivatives or predictions and so on. That requires a lot of computations. If you want to have a decentralized product on that, you need this technology for sure. And in a sense, it's also what stopped markets like derivatives to become as relevant in DeFi as DEXs or borrowing lending actually are. That's something that is super useful.
I'll tag in with a question here, which is why don't we see, for example, index funds for private companies, right? I mean, everyone knows ETF, we're a bunch of public companies. It's somewhat straightforward because the price is sort of already baked into it, but why don't we see people making sort of custom index funds? What is the barrier there? I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say there's one is the overhead, of course, of doing this on your own, which I think this whole tokenization movement addresses, but the other is it's simply about verification because it's if some unknown person says I'm selling you an index fund for people who like to do open sandwich shops. I mean, I don't know. It's like just an example. But
Algorithmic funds are certainly an issue of this kind. They are very popular. Everyone thinks about tokenizing them, but with this kind of technology, you can really tokenize them on chain, with no need of centralization, of trusting an institution. So that I think is also one big application of the verification game. The possibility to actually have on-chain proofs of something that you could not do with standard smart contracts because that would be inefficient and too expensive, definitely.
Another thing is we can also avoid some of the compilation steps that you would have to do with zero-knowledge proof, so you can directly execute JavaScript or Python code without giving technical details. It might sound magical. It's not that magical, but it works. So,
and it's a bit more transparent for those who do not necessarily want to go through very advanced crypto in a sense. That could also be an aspect. When you're talking about assets, that's often quite important. So you understand what is going on more directly.
Right. Yeah, I know we're at time. It's such an important topic. I mean, it's just like so much of RWAs, the future of this whole thing hinges on this. So gentlemen, thank you so much. I mean, this was really great. I think it gave a nice look into the topic, kind of looking at some of the issues and some of the solutions that are there waiting for us. And I think it's it's an exciting thing to watch in the future. So thank you.
thank you.